Hello, everybody. It's Kristan Kershaw here, and I'm joined by my co-host, Suzanne Kullberg. So we're here we're here today to talk about our jobs, and clearly not as an announcer or anything like that.
Or an auctioneer.
Yeah. Getting tongue-tied? Not optimal. But to talk about how we got to where we are at from a point of view, both of us have really diverse job histories and training and that sort of thing. And we know a lot of people have their own equivalents of this, but you may be listening to this going, I don't love the job I'm in, but I would really like to start a business, but I don't know how. Or I'm starting off my business and it's not where I want it to be, or anything on the spectrum from not knowing what you want to do when you grow up through to knowing what you'd love to do in your dreams and just going, that's unachievable. And sometimes these things come in a really roundabout way. And so we've talked in past episodes about random jobs that we've done, and we're like, we should come back and talk about that. So that's today's episode, is looping back to some of these vocations, careers, moments in time, concepts that we've gone, maybe I could do, and just show you how each one of those experiences, some of them amazing, some of them pretty suboptimal, actually lead us to our ideal job. And you don't even know that it may be contributing to it until after the fact. Suze, do you have anything to add to that before we sort of start down the path of where it maybe began a little?
I was to say, I feel a bit of pressure now. Like you've set us up for it. This is deep.
It could be deep, and it will be somewhat hilarious, I suspect, at times, or at least maybe to you or I.
Making ourselves unemployable, version 1.
Yep, love it. So, Suze, I'm going to flick to you first, because a little birdie or a book may have told me that you've trained in a variety of areas, but one of them is as a doctor, and 5 years into a medical degree, all but the last bit, if I remember correctly. You have many letters after your name, even if you don't necessarily need to use them all the time. And don't apply it as a GP or in a specialty or whatever. But I heard a little story earlier today that piqued my interest, and I find really interesting as a good example of why we wanted to talk about this, right? So why did you want to become a doctor? What was the thing that got you there?
I knew you were going to bring this back and fish. Sometimes when I share stuff in this group that we're mutually in, I'm like, this is going to be podcast fodder for sure. So basically, the context for everybody listening who's not in that group is we were sharing about careers and where we've gotten to, and there's somebody in this group who is a doula, so she's a birth support person, and for this particular birth it ended up being a general anesthesia. So if you're like, what does that mean? It's the person is not conscious, they're put to sleep for the delivery. And usually a doula isn't permitted in. Often, depending on the hospital, even the partner is not permitted in. My sister had a general anesthesia for her first birth, and her husband wasn't allowed into the theatre. So it's not uncommon in different places around the world. So feel free to correct me in the comments. I'm not a worldwide expert on this by any means. But anyway, the doula was talking about the anaesthetist and how she's like, I'd never seen anything like it. Like, talk about take charge. And, when you're coming to a birth that could be, a general anesthesia is suboptimal. So sometimes there can be a really emergent situation, cue to the anaesthetist to, take charge. And I was saying on the chat thread that when I was at medical school, my personal interest was in anesthetics. I was fascinated by it. And I didn't really stop to think until I was talking about it this morning, the total privilege I have had as a medical student to have witnessed as many surgeries as I have. Like, I know many of us have watched Grey's Anatomy or Chicago Med or some highly thing. And sometimes I remember I was watching, I think it was House, and they get the people the actors were like, I could totally intubate someone if I had to. And yeah, it was hilarious. Anyway, I digress. But to actually be, in the room where it happens. Don't worry, I won't sing, people. If you're a Hamilton fan, you'll know exactly what I'm talking to. But and what I was also sharing is when we went through medical school, there was different testing they did for aptitudes for specialities and recommendations of which specialties we should explore. And the one that I had got the most highest for was psychiatry. And I was like, no, I don't want to talk to people all the time. Laugh away. I know Kristan's laughing. I'm a coach. I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not a medical doctor. I don't claim to be, but I do talk to people for my career now. So that there's something to be said for the aptitude tests. I know we can dismiss them, but years worth of research and that has gone into those. So I remember the person saying to me, like, Suzanne, you would not do well with your clients being asleep most of the time. You need a level of interaction to be your work to be fulfilling. And anyway, I remember poo-pooing it and dismissing it at the time, saying, no, this is what I want to do. And anywho, I was discussing that, that time of my career and the point where I left. What else do you want to know? Let me know where you want to go from here.
I just think
to me it's boring, but I know it's curious to other people.
I guess where this is interesting is at that point, you were really drawn to one thing, right? And the journey of training as a doctor and all the rest of it, you ended up opting not to go down that path for a number of different reasons. And yet you showed an aptitude and interest from things that you chose at that point that could have had you talking to people, helping them to overcome things that were to do with mental health and psychology, and then you were training as a GP. So that's obvious.
I didn't choose a speciality. So basically, you don't train in anything. So this is the thing about medical school. So many people seem to have this misconception that you graduate as a GP. You graduate as nothing. So at least in Australia, you have a Bachelor of Medicine, Bachelor of Surgery, and then it's a minimum of 3 more years to become a general practitioner. And for almost any other speciality, pediatrician, anaesthetist, gynecologist, whatever, it's 10 years. So people who are like, oh, you were so close. And I was like, not really. I had a minimum of 3 years to go, because in Australia, or at that time, it may have changed. So once again, if you're listening to this and you're like, oh, Suzanne, you're wrong. I'm only talking about like 15 years ago now. But you would do your 6 years. And I know in a lot of places in Australia now, it's a 5-year degree. Then you would do an intern year. Then you would do a residency of a minimum of 1 year if you were going to be a GP, but often many more years. And then you would do registrar training, once again, a minimum of 1 year, often many more years. And some people will multi-discipline. So they will do obstetrics, gynecology, two disciplines, or pediatric emergency, 2 disciplines. So even once you've graduated, you're a doctor of nothing.
So what I'm hearing is you could have needed 3 to 5 years further
3 to 10
study. 3 to
minimum
10,
of
so
3
total.
and 10 if you want to do one of the bigger specialities. So and that's the other thing too, so you were trained as in you're now a doctor, but you're at the bottom of the not that we like the totem pole or the rungs or whatever, but the number of hours of study still to go, because you need, you're not getting a university degree, but you are becoming trained in that speciality. And training, the pay is poor, the hours are long, there's exams, you've got to pass a whole lot of examinations and shifts, and also keeping up to date, forevermore having to keep up to date, because as things change, in the uptake of keyhole surgery, relearning whole new things, the pressure to publish and to be a published researcher. I did my own thesis. And I did not enjoy that. I enjoy learning and studying and whatever, but crafting it in a way, and when you present it, people what is the evidence of this and where's the matter analysis? And I love, I'm going to sound so judgmental now, but this is my podcast, our podcast, so I can say it. When people come to me online and say, I've researched this, it's so you've Googled it. Actual
research is a whole lot more than just Google.
Where you're raked over the coals when you're presenting something. It was not pleasant. For some people it enlivens them and it lightens them up and they love it and they love a healthy debate and everything. But for me, I was just like, this isn't for me.
Okay, so let me rephrase that. You showed an aptitude within the process of the testing and giving you guidance on where that further study may lead you
so
to.
when you get to the later years of medical school, they want you
Yep.
to know which specialities you're going to narrow down to. So when you finish the
Yep.
6th year, you can look at, so most people haven't made a full decision for many years. Some have, some know from the get-go, I want to be this. But I wanted to be an anaesthetist. And
Yep.
that's why they were like trying to gently or not so gently steer me away from that choice.
Yeah. Yeah. And so along your journey as well, so this is one part of your study career, kind of you becoming you. You've also been a personal trainer.
Mm-hmm.
You've also had a stint in teaching, a little birdie tells me. And even though you're not in those areas, little snippets of you have then morphed from that. You've learned from those experiences. So doing teaching, for instance, I know that was just such a long-lasting passion.
6 months, people. I lasted 6 months.
So was that you went and did a grad dip and then part of
diploma
that?
of education, and I parked that. Yes.
Yep. So what did you learn from that, other than that you did not wish to continue, that you still can look back on and go, hey, I took that away as a lived lesson, and also something that helped me to then know clearer? Because where I'm headed with this is, so much of what we do, we don't know why we're doing it other than it feels good at the time. And it doesn't have to be that we know the answer, because, hey, maybe I want to be a teacher. Okay, maybe I don't. So that's part of the journey that our listeners may be on.
So for anyone listening, the way I look at the world is we have 3 currencies: money, time, and energy. And often we start down a path of a career or a job. So it's like so I'll use medical school, for example. I knew pretty close to the beginning that it wasn't for me. It was like this, it just doesn't feel aligned. But at that time, when you start medical school, you don't actually start in at the hospital. You start purely at the university, and they transition you over from 2nd year. And then by 3rd year, you're mostly hospital-based anyway. So I remember my parents at the time saying to me, well, if you just do 4 years, then you get your first degree, because it's a double degree. You get Bachelor of Medical Science, and then you get the Bachelor of Medicine, Bachelor of Surgery. So I was like, okay, well, that makes sense. And then by the time I got to 4th year and I still wanted to leave, they're like, well, there's only 2 more years to go. So then you'll have a Bachelor of Medicine, Bachelor of Surgery. Some people I know in my class did do that. They graduated, but then they never took the Hippocratic Oath. So they, but I just knew. So what I'm trying to say is, for anybody who's listening, and sometimes we can get ourselves in a hole and we can be like, but I've spent so much time. Like, I've already invested, 4 or 5 years doing this thing. Or money, because doing a university degree, lots of sorts of training, if there's an investment, in the course trainings, in the materials, in all this sort of stuff. So sometimes we can get ourselves stuck in a rut because, like, I've spent so much time or I've spent so much money. From my point of view now, on the other side of all the things, my littered past of, my husband calls me the hummingbird because I flit from thing to thing, whereas he's like the jackhammer because he's just gone deep with the same career, different iterations of it, but the same thing. But it's like, I can say I've wasted this time and this money, or I can say I invested, this much time and this much energy to know that this wasn't for me. Or I could have stayed there. And how many of us do? We just like, oh, just another year. Oh, just another year. Oh, retirement's so close. And it's like, we only have so much life. Like, time is the one currency we can never get more of. We can get more money. We can get more energy. But time, we don't know how long we have. So, in terms of your question, like, when I was leaving medical school, it was one of the hardest things I'd done up until that time. Since, it was like, that was a drop in the bucket. But, when you look at your time in life, anything that you're facing in that moment seems like a monumental decision. But are you spending that time and energy, and perhaps even money, for you, or for a future payoff that may or may not come? And is it even for your future payoff? Like, for me, really, I don't know if mum and dad listen to the podcast, shout out to them if they do. But like, my dad got so much chest pumping thing about saying my daughter's going to be a doctor. And I wanted him to be proud of me, and I wanted that for him. But there was some mismatch there because he never noticed that it didn't enliven me at all. And then I remember leaving to become a personal trainer and then a teacher and then a government worker and then, many other things. And to this day, I left in 2006. So what is it now? 16, 17 years later. When you go back to med school, I've just given up now.
Yep. And this is part of the journey. So wherever, if you're sitting here listening to this podcast going, I'm in a job that I don't really love, or doing study that I'm not really fully invested in, there can be two aspects to consider. Are you there to finish it, to be complete on it and go, okay, well, I've done that. Even if you don't love it, it may not light you up, but you may be like, all right, I'll finish this for the right reasons, meaning for something you want to tick off or complete because you're part of the way through. But what is your goal moving forward? And it's okay not to know what that is, but go with what feels right. So I did my degree a little while ago. It was before that. So my first undergraduate study is in biological science with a focus on animal science and ecology. And it wasn't a double degree as such, but I had a major and a minor within it. And I've always loved animals. My goal was actually to become a vet. So I went and I don't know how much I've disclosed that.
I don't recall that, but that's interesting. A lot of people do the animal science route first, and some do continue to be a vet, and some, like my niece wanted to be a vet and she did animal science and now she's a vet nurse. But yeah, fascinating.
Yep. And I had always wanted to be a vet. There was no two-way, and everyone was like, no doubt. But moving from Western Australia to Queensland, when you're finishing year 12 and 50% of those exams count towards your final ranking, I don't highly recommend that. It's not how they do the scoring now anyway, or at least as far as I think for most states. But there was so much more. And I look back at it now, and my brain and my body, I was not very effective at studying because I was so minerally out of balance and so much stress in my life in other ways. So I can see that now for the first time in my life in the last 5 or so years, my brain has truly started to work anywhere optimally, but I needed to go through the suboptimal times and the really stressful times to be able to actually reflect back and see it. Anyway, so I got into uni, got an okay score, but definitely not good enough for vet. So I went, right, I'm living near, I'd moved from one state to another. I was 16 years old when I finished school. So
you were young.
I was young, and it was a 6-month, like from when I finished school to my next birthday, it was actually probably 8 months or more before. Like it was a fair way. I was only 16 and a bit. And I'd moved states before that, and I was young to begin with because my birthday is a June birthday and all this sort of stuff. So I finished school young. Thankfully, I was fairly mature. I wasn't an immature 16, but started new state, didn't know anything, had always told my mum I didn't want to move anywhere north of Sydney. She moved me to Queensland, which for those not familiar with Australian geography, it's north of where I'd asked for. But it turned out they moved me to Toowoomba, which is this beautiful little regional city. It's a lot cooler and a lot nicer weather.
I love Toowoomba.
It's beautiful. It really shouts out to anyone in Toowoomba, and who knows where Toowoomba is. I actually now love where I live, and it's away from Toowoomba, and I grew to dislike the cold in Toowoomba in winter.
Only Queenslanders would say that Toowoomba's cold. Like, I laugh, but yeah, I get it.
Oh, it's so cold.
I lived in Kingaroy for, 7 years, which is an hour or two from Toowoomba. And I remember, Kingaroy gets cold. I remember it being like -8 and stuff, which by Australian standards is cold, but
it's pretty
cold.
If
you're Canadian or American, you'd be like, you guys are soft.
Yeah, totally. The wind blowing up through the range in Toowoomba in winter, nobody likes it. Let's just face the wind is horrible, but the city is beautiful. So I moved there, got into my biological sciences degree, and I was animal mad. I had in high school, my high school friends would remember, probably 20, I think at one point I had 22 fish tanks that either had fish in them or guinea pigs or rabbits, because in Perth you could have rabbits. Can't have pet rabbits in Queensland, sadly.
Oh, really? You can have, I don't know if you can have them in New South Wales. I've seen them, like my neighbours have them. I don't know if that's illegal or not, but
it's a Queensland thing, because they're worried about them escaping and the damage and whatever. So I used to have so many pets, and I was obsessed by them. The local vet, which happened to be 2 doors up at that point, became a second home to me between various animals. So I had part-time jobs that I did to pay for my pet habit, basically. But one of the vets I got to know, he would coach me effectively. Now I look back on it and give me insight into it. And he said, for the amount of pay that you get, for the amount of study that you have to do, and the stress of being a vet, he gently suggested that I seriously reconsider, because what it turned out I needed to do, the university system in the snobby university that offers vet science in Queensland, they didn't recognise any of my undergraduate study. So I did 3 years worth of study and they were not going to recognise anything. I might have gotten into the course though, which clearly makes a difference, but I would have literally had to start another undergraduate degree and do a solid 5 years plus, kind of like we're talking with the medicine, right? It's at least 5 years. And then if you want to specialise, I think at least at the end of 5 years, you can graduate as a vet, but often you need to do more, I believe, to specialise after that. So I was like, I've already done 3 years. I don't know that I can put myself through that, having to relocate and a whole lot of stuff. I ended up doing honours in an area of animal management, which completely turned my life around. I studied dingoes. So
I remember you talking about this in one of our earlier episodes.
Yeah. And so for anyone that doesn't know, they're an Australian wild dog. They can interbreed with domestic dogs, but they actually are their own species, dingoes. There are purebred dingoes around still, not as much as there once was, because of especially on mainland Australia, you get crossbreeding. But I did a project to do with determining how old dingoes were from their teeth. Something very random, but actually talking of publishing stuff, who knew that I've got multiple things published in my name from the research that I did 20 odd years ago. So I went through all this, I would do 2 part-time jobs, sometimes more, just to pay the bills of living. I moved out of home by
we should
18.
talk about that in a moment. The part-time jobs we do during uni, because I don't know if you know what mine were, but look, we'll circle back to that in a minute.
Yep. And at the end of that, I couldn't get a job. I did 4 years of study to not be able to get a job. Now, for all the awesomeness that Toowoomba is, being in the science field, there are really limited jobs for someone, especially by the time you've now gone on and done 4 years worth of study, not just 3, you further specialised. You need experience in order to get a job, but no one will give you a job to give you experience. I was not lacking in many, many skills because of all the different jobs that I had done and all the rest of it. So I ended up taking a job on absolute minimum pay, literally the minimum that the government would pay. And it took me 3 months to get that work. I was just doing my other part-time job to pay the bills at that stage as best I could. My husband had managed to, or my now husband, my boyfriend at the time, within a few months of finishing our undergraduate degree, he literally walked into a full-time research or nearly full-time research assistant role at the university where we'd both studied. He just was in the right place at the right time. And then he had good skills. So he was very employable, but it was literally a friend of ours was asked, do you know someone that's done molecular biology that, could do this sort of role? And she was like, yeah, probably him. And
isn't that amazing? And just pausing there for a moment for anyone listening, I know growing up, I was always taught you get a university degree so you can get a job. And the landscape has shifted so much. Like how many people, we toil away for however many years and then, are no more employable. Like I'm not saying don't do a university degree. I'm not saying discount all the things you learn by doing that. But I think sometimes we shy away from entrepreneurship or we shy away from our heart's calling because it's not traditional and it's not recognized. But traditional does not necessarily equate to a job. Like it's not, how we are taught or conditioned to believe for many people.
Oh, absolutely. And our challenge at that point is that my, again, now husband and I were looking after my elderly grandmother at this stage. We had transitioned just after I finished my degree, but before I started my honours, my father passed away very suddenly. And my mum and Nan had lived together and I had moved out. I ended up, long story short, my mum moved overseas to America and Scott and I moved in to look after Nan. And that was while while I was doing my honours degree, I was about to graduate from it when we moved in. And so there was a lot of stress in my life from the time when my dad passed in early 2001 through to when we moved in mid 2002 after my degree. But I still couldn't get a job. Like I spent 6 months solidly just doing whatever part-time work I could do to be contributing. Thankfully, because of the housing situation, we were able to get on fine, and Nan was helping us with food and or the cost of food and all that sort of stuff anyway. But at the start of 2003, I took a job in an engineering firm as a senior typist on minimum wage, absolute bare minimum, and got told, so I could type at 100 words per minute, which is fast.
Decent. Yeah, very decent.
And something like 98% accuracy.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That's notable. Again, if you don't know what that is, go do a type the test thing and see how
Google
fast you are.
type test and see. Let us know in the comments. What's your?
It's quite entertaining.
I haven't done that in ages. If I can be bothered, I'll go and see. But yes.
So all of a sudden, I'm in the bottom of not the absolute bottom of the admin rung, but I was in an engineering and architecture firm. They had two arms to the business. And I didn't mind. Like I was quite happy because my brain has always liked the logic. And so learning filing systems, learning about specifications, they did civil engineering as well as architecture, as well as all sorts of other hydraulic engineering, all sorts of stuff. So it was areas that I was more than happy to learn and very open to just take it on and learn the systems, whatever. I look at that now and the systems I learned in that, keeping in mind that IT systems and all that sort of thing, then very different. Like I got transcription tapes from the different engineers and town planner and all that. This was not high-tech digital stuff. And I remember getting reprimanded because I had typos like drawer, as in a drawer that you pull out and closed versus picture drawer. Going 100 words per minute, I put the wrong one in and getting reprimanded for that, and other minor errors that did not change because it was pretty obvious that it was the wrong drawer. Didn't change the meaning of it, didn't whatever, and I got reprimanded for that because I wasn't accurate enough, and that was the reason why I was not going to get paid anymore in that role, despite being promised a pay increase after 3 months. And so it was things like that. So for a year, I tolerated being treated like the scum of the earth and like I was really dumb. And the thing is, I didn't expect to be treated, oh, you've got a degree, so you need special treatment. But I needed to be treated as a human being who had a brain and who belonged in a workplace to be respected and treated as someone who actually was quite competent at what they did. And there was not a whole lot of that within it. There were some lovely guys that I worked with, the engineers and architects, but the business manager in particular, there are some really choice words I could say about him.
And to that end, sometimes it is the culture of a career type, and sometimes it's within an office or within a space, because for
Absolutely.
another period of time, which I haven't even spoke about, I worked for the unemployment agency here in Australia. And I worked out of Newcastle, and there were a lot of people there who lived on Central Coast. So it'd be like an hour drive for them. And I was like, well, why don't you work at the Central Coast office? Like, why would you drive an hour if you didn't have to? I had to drive an hour because we lived up the Hunter. And they're like, oh, no, you trust me, you want to work here. So sometimes we can dismiss a place or saying, it's this thing, like engineering is this.
Yeah,
but it could also be a particular office or a particular mindset of, so there is so many things to be said about, how our personal experiences can shape and taint and whatever. But as you're saying, like 98% accuracy, that much speed, and something like context, because draw, like ER on the end, that requires a different skill set than pure transcription. Like just currently teaching Casimir how to read and write. And sometimes what he writes down, when you look at it, well, that's just like totally wrong. But how it's heard, like the phonic, it makes sense. Yeah. Anyway, just a little side note.
So you can imagine that I've done all this study. I'm getting paid entry level still after a year. And as it happened, that was the year that Scott and I got married. And so I actually started a little side hustle making candles of all things and a little craft business. And so that then started me getting a whole lot of other skills. We did markets, because it was only a 8 till 4 or a 9 to 5, whatever job, I could do those things. And the internet had been around for a while, but online stuff was starting to become more and more a thing. And so I learned how to make websites. I learned how to do e-commerce. I learned how to do so much, which was supported by what I'd learned in being organized and ordered and whatever in the completely unrelated stuff that I did in the engineering firm. And so I actually those two together worked beautifully together. And yet that business that I launched, I sold it just before I had my third baby in 2012. And I was told the whole time I ran that it was a nothing business, that it made no money, why are you bothering putting time and effort? But I loved that business, and it taught me even more. And it kept us with some sort of income at times when I didn't have other work or whatever. It also meant that we had a viable tax write-off for internet and phone. And at times we were really financially strapped. It paid for that effectively.
Yes. So just in pausing there just for a moment for the listeners, if any of you have had any entrepreneurial type spirit and have had, a side gig or a hustle or something, it could be MLM, it could be anything like that. And it hasn't made the money that you'd hoped for or been promised. So often that we spin in disappointment or we spin in embarrassment, but we discount the lessons and the skills that we learnt in doing that. Even I think sometimes we get so focused on the end result. How many dollars did you get, or how much weight did you lose, or all this sort of stuff, that we lose sight of who we become along the way. Like, we could do a whole other episode of the number of side gigs I've tried over the years that either made no money or cost us more. But as you said, there's also the cost benefit analysis. Although I might not have made money so much, there's offsets that you get, phone, internet, travel, things that you can't do if you're fully traditionally employed. So I think sometimes we look so much at the end result. Like, I think of a lot of the things that I've learned in, all the things I've done along the way have contributed to the success that I'm now having. And this is a whole passion thing that could be another episode as well that I can get really ranty about. But sometimes we see entrepreneurs who are now become business coaches and they teach things, and then we compare ourselves to that. But when we're not looking at their journey, like, they were a corporate executive, they had this level of training, they were, they're used to all of this. These skills have helped launch this. And then if we haven't had any of those things and we don't have the connections and the people knowing us, and then we try and do exactly the same thing and it doesn't work out, and then we go, there's something wrong with us. And it's like, no, you're not just the thing you're doing right now. All of your experiences have contributed to this. And it's not saying don't bother, but just saying looking at these other things are also part of the puzzle.
Totally. And this is where I really want to emphasize to people, did that 1 year that I tolerated it in that other business doing engineering and typing, whatever, that was pivotal down the track. At the time, it paid the bills, so I was happy enough with that. The next year, I tried working. I was in a property valuer for a few months, but I was actually needing to, I know, right? Complete, for those not watching the video, Suze's face was like,
curious.
what?
I was like, wow, you and I, we should have a whole discussion of all the different things we tried. But, you dabble in this. And also, too, I think for anyone listening, too, sometimes we can go, oh, it was a waste. How are you going to know if you want to be a property valuer or a teacher or a doctor or an engineer unless you try? Like, sometimes we've watched TV shows we've read about in a book, or we've had this inkling in our hearts, and then we go along and we're like, oh, that wasn't it. That's not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, exactly. And you know what? You fast forward till 2008, years later, and I got a job in another engineering firm, completely different style, where they were advertising for a technical writer. Now, we're going to talk a bit about redundancies shortly. My husband had been made redundant. We had not quite 2-year-old twins at the time, and the redundancy money was quickly running out. And I was just in part-time work doing molecular biology. And it was like, right, who's going to get the full-time job first? And it happened to be me in the end. And I went into this, and you know what? they were really happy that I had experience in engineering. So I was aware of how an office that has an engineering focus runs. They were really happy that I could type quickly and that I had the technical skills that I did from the science background. They were really happy to give me a job because I didn't come in with any understanding of the field of engineering and the manufacturing and everything, because they needed someone to come in and refresh their technical writing department and take on something that needed a dynamic person so they could mold me. It's kind of like the whole McDonald's don't mind young kids that they can mold and train because it teaches them the habits that they want. This company did the same thing. So all those things, running my own business, working in these other things, that all fed into that job. And ironically enough, bunny hop some years later into the job I'm now in, all of those things now, plus other things that I haven't listed, that's how I was able to develop both the business that I own and the business that I run, because I had diverse skills and I'd been doing them in one way or another for so long, even though how the heck does selling a Thermomix, which I haven't even gone into great detail on, selling candles and craft supplies, writing specifications for or typing specifications for things, and molecular biology, how do they all come together? But they do beautifully.
And that's the other thing, you didn't quite touch on it, but it came to mind when you were talking just then. Originally, or a little while ago, you were saying when you first left uni, you had a degree, but nobody would hire you because you didn't have experience. There also comes along the line where you have too much experience and nobody wants to hire you because then you're then overqualified. Like, why would you want to apply for this? So a lot of this links into the work that both of us do now in terms of mindset. Because, you know, if you think, oh, there's going to be no opportunities, then you find no opportunities. Well, I'm right. I'm disappointed, but I'm right. So there's that too. But there is often a place where it's like, you don't have experience, I don't want to hire you. Oh, no, you're overqualified, I don't want to hire you. So, you know, navigating this, it reminds us of a previous episode we did with Kristan King about, we were talking about Harry Potter and, you know, the boggarts, which is the negative things and our fears in our lives. We can't walk around life trying to avoid the boggarts. It's like, how do we have our spells that protect us from that? So, you know, these things are going to happen. You're too overqualified, you're too underqualified, this and that and the other. But how do you navigate that and stay true to yourself and trust that it's going to work out?
Absolutely. If you want to be, and back to the topic, making yourself unemployable, well, if you want to be unemployable and, for instance, want to start your own business, you can totally... Like, there's so many ways we can play on that topic. You've got skills, even if you're sitting there going, but I can only do this job. There's someone very close to me who I know says this, oh, well, I need to stay in this job because this is where I've got the skills and that's all that I can do. No, you can do so many others other than that, but it's all a choice. It's, how do you want to evolve yourself? You could go in and start your own business doing something that you love outside of hours. And this particular person is very good with their hands and making amazing things that people go, oh my goodness, who did that? And then they kind of go, oh, really? So you like that? And they're very understated. The skills on that are phenomenal, but they have no formal training in that field. So they go, no, I couldn't do that. Whereas at this time in their life, it's the prime of their life where they could absolutely do it and be supported to make the shift. But they see the safety and security of the role that they're doing now, and they enjoy the role to a degree. There's a lot of politics and a lot of kind of having to do things a particular way that they tolerate. They don't love it in any way. And it's not perfect to go into working for yourself. Like, please don't be
I love
under the cloud of, I'll just walk into doing something I'm really good at and it will just happen by itself, because it doesn't. It takes time to build up a customer base or extra skills that you may not have had in areas. But without starting that, can you imagine if this person went and did that and was totally fulfilled and did less hours? They may not get the same pay, but they went to work each day feeling really fulfilled. It's a very different thing.
This is tying back to making yourself unemployable. So I'm glad you've brought us back to topic. Sometimes we hold ourselves back because I think you said that person was like, well, I don't have a official training and whatever. Depending on the industry, you don't need one. Like, I'm not saying if you want to be a brain surgeon, please make sure that person is certified, has been to medical school, has graduated, has all their things 100%. But like the career I'm now in, I'm a life coach and I love it. And I have done lots of training, and I'm not knocking certifications. I have many, but sometimes we hold ourselves back because we're like, well, I'm not certified, or I don't, but this particular industry is totally unregulated. Like there is a difference between a certification. Like one of my certifications is NLP, Neuro Linguistic Program. I did a $10,000 course, which was over a year, and I had to do 100 hours of coaching to be certified by this regulating industry. There's other ones that you can get on a freaking Udemy course for like $7. So I'm not saying that, you should have to have this, but I think sometimes we can get stuck in, I need somebody else to tell me I'm okay, but that somebody else isn't necessarily going to, as you said, bring you the clients and advertise for you in this. So sometimes people can get so, like, I remember that course I did was fabulous, but I didn't suddenly have clients lining up at my door. I still then had to learn how to market myself and how to all this sort of thing. And depending on what it is, I remember I had another client who wanted to do like bespoke furniture, but then they were like, well, I don't know the rules and the legislations about selling tables, like if it breaks or like this sort of thing. And sometimes we stop that from even going to research it. It's like, okay, well, cool. Who do you ask? Is there an ombudsman? Is there a commission? Is there something that we can research? Because with COVID, I remember the uptake of people buying artisan furniture because they couldn't go overseas or whatever. It was like, people, there's a niche for everything. Like, and thank goodness for the internet, because that's how you find people like that. But like, I remember my husband got into some stage of painting these little figurines for like Warhammer or something or whatever. And I was like, people pay for that, obviously, and it's huge. But I think sometimes we're like, oh, no one's ever going to want to do that. But they totally are.
And you may have a skill set, and even more so, you may already be naturally pulling people where they're like, how do you handcraft something and they'll buy it off you? Someone that I know, her and her daughter have come to crochet things. Well, I bought something for my youngest for her birthday last year because I'm like, oh my goodness, my daughter would love that. And she's like, really? As in, I said, I would love to buy it. If her daughter, who I think is 14, if she starts to do it and wants to sell them, put my name down first. And she just was like, really?
Yeah,
these
but
toys were so good.
You could sell the product, like the crochet. You could go, here is the product.
Yep.
You could sell tutorials, videos explaining how to do it for people who want to learn to do it themselves, or in-person workshops where like, I'm the kind of person, like, and you've got your blurred on background, but you've got the paint and sips in the background. Like, I don't want to own a whole bunch of paints and whatever, but I would pay to go somewhere and, there's so many things beyond. I think this is where the disservice or the downside of sometimes the university educated in the ways, it's like, this is the way. Yeah. Because we've always done it this way. But look at things that were created like Uber, Facebook. I'm not saying all of these things are good. I don't want to get into logistics and whatever. But sometimes there was a need and it's like, no, you have to do a taxi. Or no, you have to do this. But someone was like, well, let's give this a go. And they become, million and billion dollar companies.
Yep. Don't hold back on going and getting curious. Put it another way. If you've got something that you enjoy and that lights you up and is fun or is a nice side hustle or whatever, don't discount that could evolve into something bigger just because someone else says, just like don't sit in the space of, well, Suze, you need to become a doctor to make me proud. Not that you're saying exactly that, but the expectations on us of others to complete something or to become something or whatever, just like they can be flipped around and they can say, you're never going to come to anything. One person in particular told me that about my business, and I ended up selling my business. The stock cost plus the person who bought it off me paid a sum for the IP of the business, and that was done 5 days before my baby arrived. That was a really nice way to finish that when I'd been told the whole time that it meant nothing, that it was worth nothing. And then the one person that had always said, outside of my family, had always said that it would never sum to anything, sold their business, which in their mind was a big, important, bricks and mortar business, for a tiny bit more than what mine sold for, after stringing it along for a little bit longer. And then that person is employed by a company and has gone, and I have no problem with people going into an employee situation if they've been in a self-employed scenario, because it doesn't work for everybody and it doesn't fit your lifestyle and that sort of thing. So that's not judgmental in that form, but when I then went back into a new business, there was all sorts of continued judgment. Whereas now both of my businesses are expanding. I've got either employees or contractors that are expanding them with me. And it's a whole different kettle of fish compared to what had ever started. And I'm really proud of that. But I also don't take that person's opinion very seriously, because I came to realize that they were projecting their own.
That's what I was about to interrupt and
beliefs.
say. When someone gives you some feedback, unsolicited, often as it is, what is their agenda? Are they even in the arena? Like when I try and do something in my business now, and we all have our moments where we're like, oh, is this the best idea or whatever? Who are you going to ask? Because if you ask somebody, if I ask my husband with his traditionally employed job, he's like, that's crazy. Nobody's ever going to pay for that. You know, whereas if I say to Kristan, what do you think about this? Give it a shot.
Yeah, that tends to be
let's have a bash. And then sometimes it's like, it ends up more amazing than you can even imagine. And sometimes you're like, yeah, well, that was suboptimal. But, you know, when you're always waiting for the validation from somebody else, like you've got to believe first. And if you're waiting like for your clients or potential clients to have belief, like, can you imagine if I was, say, this brain surgeon or whatever, and you come over with this like tumor and you're like, can you operate on this? I don't know, like maybe, I'm not really sure. Like you'd be like, no, anybody would be like, next. Whereas if you are like, you know, this is the skills that I have. And I think there's something too about being transparent. And I think this is where a lot of people get burned in the online world or the business world, because somebody talks the talk and walks the walk and looks great on paper. And then you find out behind the scenes and you're like, oh my goodness, what have I put my money into or whatever. So like, I've always had this grain of transparency with, you know, like I haven't done this before, but I'll give it a shot, or this has been my experience, rather than trying, like I remember one lady in my early business days told me she trained with Jay Abraham. Do you know who he is?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So like from your point of view, if you'd heard and you were working with someone who said they'd trained with Jay Abraham, what would you take that to mean?
That sort of elevates them, that they're more skilled and more aware of that
like,
area.
I took it to mean they'd like worked with him, as in like become a done one of his courses, done one of his programs, like, you know, interacted with Jay Abraham in some way. Later on, I found out she'd read one of his books. Can you imagine if someone's like, not that I'm comparing myself to Jay Abraham in any way, shape, or form, but if someone's like, I've worked with Suzanne Kohlberg, like, and they've read my book, there's a whole, so it's like, you know, we could do another episode about, you know, transparency and whatever, but, you know, learning which questions to ask, because I remember finding out later, and I gave this person how much money and whatever. I was like, I could have given $12 to Amazon and bought his book myself. Anyway, still a bit burnt about that one. But I think with anything, you learn, what did I learn from that experience? To ask more questions and not assume that you know, we have the same understanding of what this means.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess to wrap up the journey, we've shared a little bit of both of our work histories. And
before we wrap that up, do you want to know what I did in summer holidays to make money when I was at uni?
Yeah, totally. And I'll share you some of mine and you'll laugh.
Okay,
so maybe one, but generally not.
I was a Santa photographer. So I took Santa Claus photos for, I don't know if it was 6 or 8 years. And I remember I've always looked older than I was, because you were talking about being paid minimum wage and everything.
Yeah.
They paid me as an adult because they assumed I was 18. And I don't know if they never looked at my documents or whatever. But later they found out that they overpaid me, and they're like, oh, you're good at your job, so it was fine. But I never questioned. I was a Santa Claus photographer. I worked in a lab with putting things under a microscope and measuring like diopters for like an ophthalmology place. I've stocked shelves. I've worked in a pharmacy. What else have I done? I'm just trying to think. Some of them I have, it's so funny, shoveled literal shit, like manure, and sold the bags of it. Because we walked past the sign the other day and my daughter was like, pony poo, ew, who would buy poo? And I was like, honey, it's fertilizer. So I got fit and I got paid for it. Not a lot, but delivered catalogs and I can't think of some of them now, but all sorts of things. What about yourself?
I did newspaper run when I was in school and got paid absolute minimum everything for that one. That was in Perth. I remember being on a bike and it was way too heavy for me, with a milk crate on the back and the whole thing wobbling, and all sorts of fun there. It was so funny, when I first moved to Toowoomba, I had minimal paid jobs like the paper run and stuff, but I'd volunteered in pet shelter or animal shelters and kennels and that sort of thing, and in aquarium stores, because I'd always had the fascination and hobby of aquariums. And I walked into a job with Pets Paradise. Oh goodness, that was a thing from so long ago. So it was a franchise thing that used to be all through many states of Australia, definitely Queensland, I think others as well. And I got a job at 16 and a bit, and they very quickly put me through. Speaking of paying, they were like, hang on, you've got more skills almost than the manager in this, but you're 16. Oh, we like you. So I would do whatever hours I could get, and they had Thursday night late shopping, so I'd get a bit more hours there and go in early and clean the stinky puppy and cat pens out, and I knew more about fish than anyone there, all that sort of stuff. So that paid my way, and I ended up at a couple of different stores with it, and vets doing various like admin-y things and all that. I tutored in a private girls' school, which was hilarious.
I did tutoring as well. I forgot about that. I did tutoring. I also did census. You know, now it's all online, but I'm talking back in the days where you had to drive along, and I remember they were saying, oh, no, for this route, a normal car will be fine. And I remember coming back reporting going, no, you're going to need a four-wheel drive for this, because like getting bogged in ditches. Yep.
I did census back in 2016 and found there was surprisingly then, I mean, a lot more online in the last couple since then, but or the last one since then. There was something else that I did during the tutoring. Was most hilarious because I'd actually I was tutoring in maths. I only failed one thing at uni. One thing. I was not an A. It was algebra and calculus, which is hilarious because my mum is a PhD qualified mathematician, and I failed algebra and calculus, and I came this close to organic chemistry, although I grew that knowledge after that time. I think that was partly in rebellion of my dad.
I was wondering about that. Yeah. The other thing I did was photo developing back before everything was digital, and we did it with the silver and the chemicals, and then you had to separate the chemicals and somebody come and pick them up and pay you for them. And photo developing in a 1 hour photo lab.
It's awesome.
Yeah. So anyway, we could go on for ages, but it's interesting when we look at all the different things people have done, and you can be like, well, what has this contributed? But and for anyone listening, if I hope if you got nothing else from this episode, you got a chance, or you take this chance now to reflect on things that you've done that maybe didn't turn out the way you'd hoped. I worked in a gym, obviously, because I was a personal trainer, but that you're like, oh, it didn't turn out how I hoped. What did you learn? What skill set are you using unconsciously that you can be like, if nothing else, I got this from here, or like I got to, so this wasn't for me. Because it was funny you were saying about being a vet, and I was saying about my niece. My first job ever when I was a kid, I wanted to be a vet. And then I remember being told, oh, well, animals can't talk, so people do, so you should be a doctor. And I never really questioned that. And how often do we just follow what we're told by somebody else? And even, starting businesses, or who pay for that, just because the person you're speaking to wouldn't pay for that. There's 8 billion people in the world. There'll be somebody who pays for it. Like there's a lady who, kid you not, Google this if you don't believe me. She farts in jars and sells them. She made $250,000. If you're not watching the video, it's worth watching the video just for Kristan's face. You haven't heard? She made $250,000 selling farts in jars. Like, look at the dude who come up with the pool noodle or sticky notes or things, like things that we just think, or apps, like people who make apps and then have millions of dollars. There'll be a market for it. So just because the person you're speaking to directly is going to be like, oh, maybe it's a projection of them not wanting to go after their own dreams, or that they wouldn't buy it. But there's lots of things on earth that I wouldn't buy, like, some handbag worth $20,000. But there's other people who would.
Absolutely. Follow what do you like? What are you good at? And what, like in the scheme of things, what transferable skills have you got? Because I got transferable skills from every single job that I've ever done, including that paper run, including the tutoring where I learned how to reverse engineer and came to realize that I wasn't as dumb as I thought I was, because I came out of that thinking I was pretty, well, you've got all this behind you. I had very spectacular academic pressures, influences around me.
Yes. And if you're not sure about, whether there's a governing body or the legalities or whatever, like Google somebody, like pay a fee to a lawyer, like research, find out, like properly research it. But
Yeah.
don't let it, I don't know, hold you back, because so many things aren't legislated, and we let that hold us back. But, obviously do your due diligence. But I think sometimes it's kind of like, or it's been done before, like how often. And the other thing I'd recommend for anyone listening, if you're in Australia, it's on Disney Plus. I don't know if I've told you to watch this or recommend it to you, Kristan. Joy, the movie Joy, starring,
no,
what's
I've
her
heard
name?
of it,
She's
though.
from the Hunger Games. What's the chick who plays Jennifer Lawrence? Absolutely brilliant. So if you've got any entrepreneurial skills in your body, have a watch of that movie and let us know what your idea is and what you're going to pursue. And how can you make yourself unemployable and celebrate that?
Yeah.
And then we have to do another episode on the redundancies because we didn't get to that, but I have
That's
a
true.
lot to add to that topic as well.
It just builds on that, right? It's what resilience have we got? We sure learn it, but it's all part of the learning experience. So learn. All right.
Yep.
Thank
Thanks,
you, everyone, for
everybody.
taking
We'll see you on the
time.
next one. Bye.
Bye.